Skidoo, Howard.
Howard, do a cat. Howard, do a cat.
He ducked. He grabbed the desk. His eyes went wide, and then the bat was gone. Somewhere. In the studio.
No, I didn't. This was bred at our wild animal.
These are 10 of the funniest, most unhinged, most completely unpredictable animal appearances to ever invade The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and the moments that left even the coolest host in television history totally and completely undone.
Come on, boy, one more. He's cute. Good.
Now, most people remember the monkey. They remember the chimp in the business suit and the gorilla that sent Johnny scrambling behind his desk.
You want some of this?
That's good.
But what most people don't know is that those were just the headline acts. Behind them, night after night, was an entire zoo's worth of chaos that never made the highlight reels. Fruit bats flying loose in the studio.
A great white hunter I'm not, you know. Here comes the rhinoceros.
A sloth so spectacularly motionless it somehow became the funniest thing on television. A chameleon that practically vanished in front of a live audience. A hyena that sounded like it was laughing at NBC's quarterly earnings report.
In there.
The poison on your hands can be...
These were the moments that made even the production crew lose it, the ones that went off script in ways nobody could have planned. Tonight, we're digging into 10 completely different animal appearances that turned The Tonight Show's set into a wildlife documentary nobody asked for, and revealing why, decades later, these moments are still the purest, most joyful television ever made.
Just a minute here. Come on. Here's your chair.
But first, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, because number 10 alone is going to tell you everything you need to know about what happens when you mix Johnny Carson, a live studio audience, and a wild animal that absolutely did not get the memo about staying calm.
Hear the bell?
Johnny, I do.
Let's get into it. Number 10, the bush baby that wouldn't sit still. The late 1970s, Burbank, California, when a small African bush baby arrived on the set of The Tonight Show and immediately made it clear that it had no intention of following the format. Now, a bush baby, also known as a galago, looks, at first glance, like something an animator dreamed up after a very long night. It is roughly the size of a squirrel. It has enormous, luminous eyes that take up approximately 40% of its face. And it possesses legs designed, almost architecturally, for leaping distances that seem physically impossible for an animal its size. They are extraordinary creatures. They are also completely, utterly incapable of sitting still. The handler brought it out expecting a calm, educational segment. Johnny was leaning forward at the desk. The audience was quiet, charmed before the thing even moved. Everything looked completely under control. And then the bush baby turned its dinner plate eyes toward the studio lights. And that was it. Something clicked in that tiny, ancient brain and it launched. Not walked. Not scurried. Launched, the way a spring-loaded toy goes when you press it wrong. It hit the desk. It bounced. It hit a camera. It ricocheted off a PA who was not prepared for this assignment. Johnny Carson, who had survived decades of television chaos, watched it arc over the desk and simply said, "Where did it go?" Looking genuinely, completely baffled. The audience erupted. The handler was already on her feet. The bush baby had, in under 12 seconds, turned a late-night talk show into a nature documentary in fast forward. The segment continued with Carson narrating its movements like a wildlife commentator. There it is. No, there. No, that's a shadow, while the audience laughed so hard the applause kept cutting him off. What was supposed to be a calm educational moment became pure, beautiful mayhem. That is precisely the thing about a bush baby, it doesn't care about your format. That is precisely why we're still watching these clips all these years later. But if number 10 showed us what happens when chaos is small and incredibly fast, number 9 is going to show us what happens when the animal brings its own punchline, built right in. Number 9, the hyena with the creepy laugh. A weeknight taping in the late 1970s, NBC Studios, Burbank, when Joan Embery, the San Diego Zoo's legendary ambassador, arrived with a spotted hyena and a segment that Carson would later say he was completely unprepared for. Joan Embery was a fixture on The Tonight Show. By the time this segment aired, she had appeared alongside Carson dozens of times, bringing animals that ranged from the magnificent to the absolutely terrifying. She had a gift for making wild animals feel approachable, and Carson genuinely trusted her. The audience loved her. She was, in television terms, a sure thing. The hyena, however, had not been briefed on any of this. The animal came out calmly enough, stocky, spotted, moving with that distinctive rolling gait that makes hyenas look slightly like the world's most unsettling dogs. Carson studied it carefully. He asked Embery about its diet. He asked about its habitat. He leaned in, genuinely curious. And that's when the hyena decided to express itself. The vocalization started low, a kind of chuckling, whooping sound that rose into something that could only be described as maniacal giggling. It filled the studio. The audience froze for exactly 1 second and then exploded. Carson stared at the animal, stared at the audience, and delivered the line perfectly. "That sounds exactly like the NBC boardroom when they're reviewing my contract." The laugh that followed rattled the set. What made this moment legendary wasn't just the joke, it was the timing. Carson's comic instinct was so finely tuned that he landed the line in the exact 1-second window between the audience's shock and their laughter. He used the hyena as a straight man. He made a wild animal into a setup. Embery, for her part, was laughing too hard to continue the segment for a full 30 seconds. The clip remains one of the most replayed Carson-Embery moments on the internet. That is comedy gold, plain and simple. But if number 9 gave us chaos with a sense of humor, number 8 is going to go in the opposite direction entirely and prove that sometimes the funniest thing on television is absolutely nothing happening at all. Number 8, the sloth that moved slower than the interview. A Tonight Show taping in the early 1980s, when a three-toed sloth arrived on stage and proceeded to test the patience of an audience, a host, and approximately 14 production staff members. Sloths are, by biological design, the antithesis of television. They move at roughly 2 meters per minute when motivated. When unmotivated, which is most of the time, they barely move at all. They hang upside down. They sleep up to 20 hours a day. Everything about their existence is a form of spectacular, deliberate stillness. Whoever approved this segment for late-night television either had a brilliant sense of humor or absolutely no idea what a sloth actually does. The handler placed the sloth on the center of Carson's desk. It gripped the edge with those long, curved claws. It blinked once. Slowly. Carson watched it. The audience watched it. The cameras watched it. A full 10 seconds passed. Nothing happened. Carson looked at the handler. The handler looked at Carson. The audience started laughing, not because something happened, but because nothing did. And that's when Carson reached for his watch. "I'm timing it," Carson announced to the audience, holding his watch up with complete seriousness. "It's been 11 seconds. It has not moved." He leaned in closer. "It's going to be a long night for both of us." The audience was completely undone. The sloth, for its part, blinked again. Deliberately. As if to say, "I have all the time in the world, and I am aware that you do not." The segment became a masterclass in reverse comedy. The humor wasn't in the chaos but in the absence of it. Carson played the straight man to an animal that wasn't doing anything, and it worked perfectly, because his commitment to timing the sloth's movements with genuine scientific seriousness made the whole segment feel like a nature documentary hosted by a very patient, very amused man. The audience laughed harder with every passing second of stillness. Some of the funniest moments in television aren't about what happens. They're about what doesn't. But don't worry, number 7 is going to snap us right back into chaos, because what happened when a golden eagle spread its wings directly next to Johnny Carson's face was absolutely not planned, and Johnny's reaction was absolutely priceless. Number 7, the eagle that refused to cooperate. A taping in the late 1970s, NBC Studios Burbank, when wildlife expert Jim Fowler arrived with a golden eagle that had a wingspan of nearly 7 feet and absolutely zero interest in being cooperative. Jim Fowler was Marlon Perkins' partner on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which meant that by the time he appeared on The Tonight Show, he had already spent years handling animals that could injure him in ways most people prefer not to think about. He was steady. He was knowledgeable. He was the kind of man who carried a bald eagle through an airport with the calm energy of someone picking up dry cleaning. Fowler was completely fine. The eagle, however, was not particularly interested in following directions. The bird arrived on Fowler's gloved arm, magnificent and completely indifferent. Carson asked questions. Fowler answered. Everything seemed fine. And then the eagle decided, for reasons known only to eagles, that it wanted a better look at the studio. It spread its wings. Not a little. Fully. 7 feet of golden eagle wingspan, directly beside Johnny Carson's head. The cameras caught Carson's eyes going wide, pupils contracting, shoulders pulling back, the involuntary response of a human being suddenly adjacent to a very large bird of prey. Carson leaned back very slowly, maintaining eye contact with the eagle, and said in the calmest possible voice, "I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I'd like that to stop." The audience completely lost it. Fowler, for his part, was already murmuring to the bird. The eagle retracted its wings slowly, unhurriedly, at its own pace, as if granting a favor. What made the moment extraordinary was Carson's complete, unshakable commitment to dignity in the face of a 7-foot wingspan. He didn't yelp. He didn't scramble. He simply requested, in the tone of a man asking a slightly difficult colleague to lower their voice, that the bird stop doing what it was doing. The audience read every frame of that restraint and loved him for it. Recalled one camera operator who was present that night, he never once looked like he was performing. That was the real reaction. That's what made it perfect. That clip now lives on across a dozen YouTube channels where it racks up new views every single week. But if number 7 showed us Carson keeping his composure, number 6 is going to take us somewhere different, to the moment an animal walked onto that stage and made the audience laugh before it did a single thing. Just by existing. Number 6, the aardvark nobody could stop staring at. An evening taping in the late 1970s, when Jim Fowler brought an aardvark to the Tonight Show and the audience reacted to its appearance with the confused, delighted laughter of people who weren't entirely sure what they were looking at. An aardvark is, by any objective measure, one of nature's most visually bewildering achievements. It has the snout of an anteater, the ears of a rabbit, the body of a pig, and the movement of something designed by a committee that couldn't quite agree on the brief. It is not threatening. It is not dramatic. It simply looks, at all times, like a first draft of an animal that never got revised. The moment it appeared on stage, the audience laughed, not cruelly, but with the pure, helpless laughter of people confronting something unexpected. Fowler began his introduction. The aardvark moved across the desk, snout working steadily, ears swiveling with private interest. Carson watched it with the expression of a man genuinely trying to categorize what he was looking at. The audience was already in pieces. And that's when Carson leaned over to Fowler and said, with total sincerity, "Who approved this design?" Continued, "Yes, I feel like someone at Nature's design department had a very long week." Carson tutoring the aardvark with mock professional intensity, and this was the Friday afternoon project. The audience erupted. The aardvark continued sniffing the desk, completely unmoved. It had the dignity of an animal that had heard every joke and simply did not care. CC. That is precisely why we are still watching him all these years later. But number 5 is where we shift from funny looking to funny moving, because what a penguin did when it stepped out onto that stage was something that 12 writers in a room could not have scripted. Number 5, the penguin that stole the show. A Tonight Show taping in the early 1980s, when Joan Embery brought an African penguin to the set, placed it on the floor, and watched it immediately decide to conduct its own tour of the studio. African penguins are, technically, manageable animals. They're roughly the size of a house cat. They don't have claws worth worrying about. They aren't fast. In theory, a penguin on a television set should be completely containable. In practice, a penguin on a television set is a small, tuxedoed authority figure with an extremely strong opinion about where it wants to be, and no particular interest in negotiating. Embery set the penguin down near the desk. It looked left. It looked right. It assessed the situation. And then, with the measured, unhurried confidence of a network executive arriving late to a meeting, it began to walk. Not toward Carson. Not toward the handler. Toward the audience. The cameras followed. The audience started laughing the moment it took its first step, because there is something in the penguin's waddle, that particular side-to-side roll, the flippers held slightly out, the chin up, that communicates an absolute certainty about the correctness of one's own direction. Carson watched it go, leaned back in his chair, and said, "I want whatever confidence that penguin has." The audience erupted. The penguin reached the edge of the set, paused, appeared to reconsider, then turned and began the return journey with equal certainty. Embery was on her feet. The handlers were on their feet. Nobody caught the penguin, because the penguin didn't need to be caught, it was simply going where it needed to go. The audience loved every single waddling step. There was something irresistible about an animal that walked with such total self-assurance, no hesitation, no anxiety, no awareness of the cameras, the lights, or the studio audience watching its every move. In a world of performed confidence, the penguin's was real. Carson understood that instinctively. He played off it brilliantly. That clip remains one of the most replayed Embery Carson moments in Tonight Show history, for a very simple reason: you cannot fake that walk. But number four is where the chaos stops being charming and starts being genuinely, beautifully out of control. Because the baby baboon did not waddle. The baby baboon attacked. Number 4, the baby baboon that attacked everything. A late 1970s taping in Burbank, when Jim Fowler introduced a juvenile baboon to the Tonight Show stage, and it proceeded to treat the entire set as its personal gymnasium, pantry, and fortress. Baby baboons are profoundly social, intensely curious, and equipped with the manual dexterity of a small person who has been told repeatedly not to touch things and has decided that this rule does not apply to them. They grip. They climb. They grab objects and inspect them with focused interest. They are, by every measure, engaging, and by every production standard, completely impossible to control once they have decided they are interested in something. On this particular night, the baboon was interested in everything. Fowler brought it out and it was immediately in motion, fingers exploring the surface of the desk, eyes scanning the set with the concentrated interest of a detective at a crime scene. Carson watched carefully, hands slightly raised, maintaining the posture of a man who was not sure whether anything specific was about to go wrong but was reasonably certain that something was. And that's when the baboon reached across the desk and grabbed Carson's notes. Carson watched his notes go into the baboon's hands. The baboon inspected them thoroughly. Turned them over. Appeared to read them. Carson, maintaining perfect composure, looked at the audience and said, "You know what, it's possible he's more prepared than I am." The audience completely lost it. The baboon, apparently satisfied with the notes, attempted to eat the corner of one. Fowler retrieved them. The baboon immediately located Carson's coffee mug. The segment ran several minutes longer than planned because nobody could stop laughing long enough to wrap it. Every time Fowler redirected the baboon, it found something new: a camera cable, a nearby prop, the arm of Carson's chair. The chaos was non-stop, relentless, and completely joyful. What made it work was Fowler's calm and Carson's wit, two professionals playing off an animal that had no concept of television and no interest in developing one. But if number 4 showed us chaos you can see coming, number 3 is something completely different. Because the Canada lynx didn't grab anything. It didn't run anywhere. It simply walked toward Johnny Carson, slowly, with enormous paws, and the look on his face told you everything you needed to know. Number 3, the Canada lynx with the giant paws. An early 1980s Tonight Show taping, when Joan Embery brought a Canada lynx to the set and accidentally produced one of the clearest pieces of evidence that Johnny Carson, cool as he was, had a very specific comfort zone, and a large wildcat was outside of it. Canada lynx are medium-large wild cats built for the boreal forest, tufted ears, short tail, and those remarkable oversized paws, which are essentially natural snowshoes, wide and padded for silent movement across deep snow. They are, by the standards of wild cats, not especially aggressive. They are also not domestic. They are not pets. They are precisely the kind of animal that looks manageable until it is 3 feet from your face and you remember that you are not, in fact, a wildlife handler. Embery had the lynx on a lead. It was calm, composed, moving with the liquid grace of a cat that is completely aware of its own magnificence. Carson watched it from behind the desk. Embery walked it closer. The lynx's eyes found Carson. It moved toward him, not aggressively, just with the mild, evaluating curiosity of a large cat deciding whether a person is interesting. Carson's hands went flat on the desk. His shoulders moved back. Everything looked fine. And that's when the lynx reached out one enormous paw and placed it on Carson's knee. Carson looked at the paw. He looked at Embery. He looked at the audience. He said, very quietly, "That is a very large hand." The lynx continued to regard him with absolute serenity. "It's calmer than I am," Carson admitted, and the audience erupted, because the contrast was perfect. The wild cat composed, still, unbothered, the host of the Tonight Show frozen, eyes wide, maintaining dignity through what was clearly significant effort. The lynx remained calm for the entire segment. It never hissed. It never swiped. It was, by every behavioral measure, completely relaxed. This made it funnier, not less, because Carson's visible discomfort played against the animal's total ease, and every time the audience thought he was settling in, the lynx shifted its weight and the whole cycle started again. Embery used the moment brilliantly, explaining the lynx's anatomy while Carson provided inadvertent physical comedy. That is comedy gold, plain and simple. The funniest moments always come from the gap between expectation and reality. But number 2 is something I want you to think about for a second, because the comedy in number 2 isn't sound, and it isn't speed, and it isn't a wild animal invading someone's personal space. It's the fact that nobody could find it. Number 2, the chameleon that disappeared on stage. A Tonight Show taping in the early 1980s, when Joan Embery brought a chameleon to the set, placed it on a prop branch near Carson's desk, and the studio audience spent the next several minutes genuinely, actively unsure if they were looking at an animal or a branch. Chameleons are among nature's most extraordinary visual tricks. Their color-changing ability isn't camouflage in the military sense, it's communication, thermoregulation, and a biological marvel that happens to be almost supernaturally effective. When a chameleon decides to be invisible, it is very close to invisible. On a television set, under studio lighting, against a prop branch selected specifically to contrast with it, the chameleon adapted anyway, because that is what chameleons do. Embery pointed to the branch. Carson looked. The audience looked. There was a long pause. A camera pushed in. A second camera pushed in. People in the front row leaned forward. And that's when a woman in the third row said, loudly enough to be picked up on the microphone, "I still can't see it." The audience dissolved. Carson looked at Embery and said, "Neither can I." "Are we sure it's here?" Embery pointed more precisely. Carson leaned in, genuinely squinting, not performing, and finally said, "Right. Okay. I see something. I see a shape that might be an eye." He straightened up, turned to the audience, and delivered the line with perfect calm, "NBC has been considering invisible guests to cut costs. This is a pilot program." The audience completely lost it, and the chameleon, somewhere on the branch, continued existing with tremendous dignity. The genius of this segment was visual, it was television doing something that only works on television. The audience at home could see the chameleon with the camera's help, which meant they were simultaneously watching the studio audience and Carson fail to see what they could see perfectly clearly. That double perspective comedy was accidental, unrepeatable, and completely perfect. Recalled one producer who worked on the segment, "We had no idea it would play like that. You can't write that. The animal did that." We've actually covered some of the most legendary invisible moments in Tonight Show history in another video, I've linked it in the pinned comment. But now, number 1. The bat. The escaped, flying, studio-invading fruit bat that sent Johnny Carson diving behind his desk in front of a live audience, and produced what many people who were there that night still call the single funniest unrehearsed moment in the show's entire run. Number 1, the bat that terrified Johnny Carson. A late 1970s taping at NBC Studios, Burbank, California, when wildlife expert Jim Fowler brought a fruit bat to The Tonight Show, and it escaped, and flew around the studio, and Johnny Carson spent several minutes in a state of pure, genuine, completely unperformed panic. Jim Fowler was one of the most experienced wildlife handlers in American television. He had worked with snakes, big cats, primates, birds of prey, and animals that could end an interview in ways the Standards and Practices Department preferred not to contemplate. He was steady under pressure. He was professional. He was, by every standard, the person you wanted in the room when an animal went rogue. The bat, however, had a different plan. Fruit bats, the species Fowler brought that evening, are large by bat standards. Wingspan up to 2 feet. Big, dark-furred bodies. They navigate by sight as much as echolocation, which means they move fast and with apparent purpose. They are not dangerous to humans. They are also not inclined to sit still on a television desk under studio lighting while a live audience watches them. The segment started cleanly. Fowler had the bat on his gloved hand, explaining its biology while Carson maintained the careful, studied calm of a man trying very hard to feel comfortable about a large bat near his face. The audience was watching closely. The cameras were tight. Everything was in order. And then, for reasons that remain the bat's own private business, it spread its wings and launched itself into the air. Into the studio. Into the lights. Gone. For 1 second, the entire studio went silent. Fowler watched it go. Carson watched it go. The audience watched it go. And then it turned and came back, low, fast, sweeping across the set, and everything happened at once. Johnny Carson, host of The Tonight Show, veteran of 30 years of live television, the coolest man in American broadcasting, ducked. He ducked hard, both hands going up, head going down behind the desk, with the pure, biological reflexiveness of a man whose body had made a unilateral decision that was not going to wait for his brain to sign off. The audience screamed. Not frightened screams, the screams of people watching something real happen, watching the mask come off, watching their unshakable host completely and genuinely shaken. Carson came back up, hair slightly rearranged, and said, "That is not in the contract." What happened next became one of the most replayed sequences in Tonight Show history. The bat circled. Carson ducked again. The audience screamed again. Fowler, somewhere off camera, was doing his level best to retrieve it. Carson, between ducks, kept talking to the audience, narrating his own panic with perfect comic awareness, as if part of his brain had stepped outside the situation and was already writing the bit. "It's fine," he said, watching the bat bank past the camera. "This is fine. This is a controlled situation." It was not a controlled situation. Everyone knew it. That was what made it perfect. The bat was eventually retrieved. The segment ran long. When it finally ended, Carson smoothed his jacket, straightened his tie, and looked at the audience with the expression of a man who had faced something real and come through the other side, slightly disheveled, completely alive, and thoroughly amused by his own reaction. Recall the camera operator who was working that night. "I couldn't hold the shot. I was shaking too hard from laughing." The floor director was losing it. The whole crew was gone. What happens when something real breaks through the surface of a carefully produced television show, when the format cracks, just for a moment, and something genuine comes through, is the rarest thing in broadcasting. That night, a fruit bat made it happen. The clip now lives on across dozens of channels and has been viewed millions of times. It remains the gold standard for what an animal segment on The Tonight Show could become when everything went perfectly, beautifully wrong. Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years. In that time, he welcomed hundreds of animal segments. Some were magnificent. Some were educational. Some were chaos from the first second to the last. But the ones that have lasted, the ones that live on YouTube with view counts that keep climbing year after year, are the moments like these: the bat that escaped, the sloth that refused to move, the eagle that spread its wings, the chameleon that vanished. The moments that nobody planned. And Carson, with that unshakable, laser-precise comic instinct, made every single one of them feel like television was supposed to be exactly this: not rehearsed, not polished, not produced within an inch of its life, but alive. Spontaneous. Real. He turned animal chaos into art, not by controlling it, but by letting it happen and finding the joke in the exact right moment. No script could have written a bat flying loose in Studio One. No writer's room could have planned the sloth's perfect, majestic inaction, or the penguin's certain waddle, or the lynx's enormous paw landing on the host's knee. These moments happened because Johnny Carson understood something that very few people in television ever learn, that the funniest thing on earth is always the thing nobody saw coming, and the greatest gift you can give an audience is the look on a man's face when the world surprises him, and he's honest enough to show it.